Today we have an effective communication workshop with consultants from DesignForce. And if y'all would like to go ahead and introduce yourselves, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Wahnetah, you want to kick it off for us?
Yeah, so I'm Wahnetah. I am an associate workforce strategy consultant with DesignForce. I have been in the industry for 2 years. Originally, I was a teacher, and then I decided that I really wanted to be people focused. So I started learning about civil engineering, and then a year into it, I wanted to do more with like DEI, more within like the whole scope of the AEC and built environment. So I hopped on over to DesignForce, and I get to work with career professionals every single day and talk to students about different core skills such as effective communication.
Yeah, and hi everyone, I'm Alice. Also, just like Wahnetah, I'm a consultant at DesignForce. My background was a little different. I'm from New Mexico. I was originally working for like an attorney for a while, and just really decided I wanted to pivot into more of the built environment, as we call it. So really spend my days just chatting with engineers, with architects, with landscape architects, and just talking about their careers and everything. A bit more about just what we do at DesignForce, in case you don't know, we're a bit of a niche in this industry. So I think just some helpful context about who we are is that we're a management consulting firm, but we work specifically within the AEC industry. So architecture, engineering, construction, that is our entire MO. But we work on the people side of things. So we kind of have like two parts to our business, you could call it. The first of which is that we work with firms in the industry, so civil engineering firms, architecture firms, really helping them focus on how to make their employee experience better. It's a very projects-based industry, and it can get very hectic trying to, get things across the finish line. So our approach is to really encourage these firms to be thinking about how that can be done most sustainably. So you're not burning out at work, and so you can be supported at work and have a good work-life balance while also prioritizing your professional development. And then the second sort of bucket that we behind door number 2 is that we really just work with engineers. We offer just free consulting services. So we just chat with engineers about sort of all of these items here. We'll help you map out your career. We can do a market sort of compensation analysis to, pull market data, make sure what you're earning is equitable in the industry. We do resume and portfolio critiques, help you prepare for interviews, and any and everything in between, really. We're just here to be a free, confidential resource for you to talk about your career. You can almost think of it like university career services, but for after you're graduating, and we're very specialized within this industry. Any questions on that? Excellent. All right.
Today we'll be covering a few learning objectives. So what is effective communication? Why is effective communication important to you as designers, especially for internships and full-time opportunities? And if some of you are freshmen and sophomores, group projects, your different communication styles. We'll be going over 4 different styles, and then how to identify those different styles and best practices for each style. So that's what we'll be covering today. And so I guess we'll pose to the audience, why is effective communication important in the built environment? I know that some people are in a classroom and on different laptops, but if anyone wants to kind of take a swing at why effective communication is important, we'd love to hear your answers.
Yeah, and feel free to add something to the chat as well if that's
Yeah.
easier. Haha.
I'm curious a little bit more on what you mean by in the built environment.
Yeah.
Good follow-up. Yeah.
So the built environment is the man-made environment. So when we're working with architects, they build like buildings. When we talk about landscape designers, whether it's the plazas, anything that really intersects with the natural environment. So that could be your parks, your studios, a roadway, anything that's constructed.
I figured that so, but I just wanted to double check. I think that why it's important is, especially from a landscape architect point of view and a student, we design a lot with communities and we work a lot with in like charrette projects, and you're always designing for others and not just what looks nice or what you think, I think looks good here or will function well. So I think that communication portion is really important when talking to your client and then the community who you're designing for, and what's needed in such spaces within the built environment for those people. And that's really where that communication comes in. That's what I would say.
Totally. No, I think that's a really, really important point to bring up as well, especially when you're in that designing seat as a landscape architect, kind of thinking about the community stakeholders, because that's exactly who you're designing for, and trying to, think about how they'll be using a space, or, in the larger community too. Maybe you're thinking about the sustainability of the space that you're trying to design and how the longer term impacts of that might affect the community. And then I see Alex here also threw in the chat, helps people understand a perspective that is not your own and helps design be for all. I like that one as well. Because it kind of touches here on how there can be multiple perspectives that go into building something like that. Wahnetah, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I think that on like a more like focused lens, when you're working with teams, whether it's a group project or in your everyday life, it's important to know how they communicate so that you can work most like effectively with them, and make sure that it's as efficient as possible and everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and so sort of the definition, I guess, the working definition we can think of today when, we're talking about communication, that's a really broad topic. So I'm going to put an emphasis on the effective part of effective communication. It's something we do constantly, whether or not we're even thinking twice about it. But one thing I want to kind of like pose as a question to be thinking about today is how much of our communication is reaching its intended audience the way we hope it is. So we're kind of thinking about effective communication as that process of exchanging your ideas, your opinions, your thoughts, data, so that the message is received and understood the way it's intended. And, whether, you're thinking about that in terms of moving forward with an internship this summer or full-time position, communication, I think, only becomes more and more important as we're going throughout our career, as we're, navigating final projects throughout the semester. So definitely something that's a skill that can always be worked on. And it's definitely possible to kind of implement some tips and best practices that we'll try to cover today. And then Wahnetah, you want to kick us off with some numbers?
Yeah. And so in 2018, they did a survey, and they wanted to look at what causes ineffective communication. And the top three reasons was different communication styles. So everyone has different communication styles, and if you don't know how to really work with them, it can cause a lot of problems. Unclear responsibilities. So people weren't clear on what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do their job. And that goes back to how your supervisor or manager communicates with you. And then the third one was time pressures. And this is so important, especially in the industry, because everything is set by timeline and deadlines. And sometimes when you feel stressed or pressure, the communication can just go away. And that causes a high level of stress. And then there's some other things, as you guys see, but the top three were different communication styles, unclear responsibilities, and time pressures.
Mhm.
And so now that you guys know that, we're going to go over the different styles. And so we'll be talking about 4 different styles: analytical, functional, personal, and 2 of communicators. And so for the next exercise, we're going to see what kind of communication styles you all have, and that will kind of lead, we'll talk about the different styles and how to best work with them. But first, let's see what everyone in the room's styles are.
Mhm. So on that too, really quick, we're going to just share our screens to show you an inventory. You can feel free to essentially fill this out on your own. And we'll give you a couple minutes for that. But one thing I also want to clarify is that, communication again can be very broad and complicated. So don't overthink some of your answers to these questions. Really, the intention is to kind of hone in on what you tend to naturally gravitate towards. But if you find that you might be kind of split among different ones, that's okay. That's normal. But I would recommend just looking at it through a lens of what do you kind of more naturally gravitate towards. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And then Wahnetah, if you could pull that up.
Can you all see this?
Yes.
Awesome. So we'll give you like 2-3 minutes, and then we'll go into what they mean. We'll give y'all like 30 seconds.
And then if you do have it completed at this point, feel free to drop it in the chat as well.
All right, 1 second. Does everyone
one
have their styles?
Sorry.
Does everyone? Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I'm curious, raise your hand if you're an analytical communicator. Oh, wait, I'm missing. Okay. Can't see. Okay, now I can. Raise your hand if you're analytical.
I don't think we have.
No one in the room. Okay. What about functional? Oh, okay. So 3 functional.
Wahnetah's happy to hear that.
Yes. What about personal?
Okay, we had a
Like
personal.
1.
Okay.
Oh, is that like a
Dominique.
2?
Okay.
And then I saw someone kind of like the hand was like maybe,
out.
and then intuitive. Okay. Did anyone come across where you were like, oh, I'm kind of both in terms of communication styles? Basically, head nods. And what styles were you guys like kind of in between? Yeah.
As you can see.
Between the
Anyone else?
I was in between two, but I forget what the first one was because I related, it still kept leading me
Yeah.
to personal.
hmm So the first one was analytical. And then it was functional, personal, and
Functional,
intuitive.
that was the other one. I was leaning towards functional, but then that one question led me back over to personal.
Okay.
The details versus end result led me to.
Yeah. Was anyone surprised about the results?
No.
I saw a little.
I was not, to be honest with you, I was not impressed.
Awesome. Well, now that you guys know that your communication styles, let's do kind of an overview of each one. So the first one is analytical. And an analytical communicator, can anyone like guess in like 2-3 words what an analytical communicator is? Go ahead, Alice.
I know that this person is very data driven and likes to look at the numbers before they start making some decisions.
They do. Okay. So that's exactly right. So an analytical communicator is someone who is all about the data, the numbers, the facts. They really only look when making a decision about the data. And so this is the person in group projects who will bring research to the table. They'll say, well, let's look at the data, let's look at the history, and things like that. They're considered usually experts because they are highly knowledgeable because they take into consideration everything. And Alice, you can go to the next slide. They really try to have attention to details. They love all the details up front, and not later on in the road, because that's where all of their decisions come from. They usually take on an unemotional delivery because they're so factual. They are able to look at issues logically and unbiased. And in the workforce, there usually are the technical experts. And so sometimes you may interpret these people as aggressive in their communication style, because they'll say, look at the numbers, look at the facts. Like, I don't have any, I don't want to know your emotional response. I want to know what it is, the feelings of it. So that's a little bit about an analytical communicator.
Moving on to functional.
Yes, the next one is a functional communicator. We have a lot of functional communicators in the room, so I would love to hear what you guys think a functional communicator is.
Very like structured communicators. They like to know what's
100%.
next or what they've already done, a list.
No, absolutely, you are correct. A functional communicator is they're task oriented, they like their list, they always have a system. And then we can go to the next slide. And then, so they are process oriented. They love the step-by-step. These are the people in a group project who always have timelines and plans. They might present it and be like, we need to do this stage from April to May, or this needs to get done by March so we can QA, QC, or edit by May. They are often seen as an implementer. So you'll have an idea and they'll run with it. They also take confidence in the details. So they want as many details as possible upstream in the beginning so that they can really get their process started. Sometimes these people can really lose others in the attention to details, being so granular, but they always have a process. They always have a procedure. And then the next one we'll talk about is a personal communicator.
Yeah, the next one, I believe we had a personal communicator in the room. But these are sort of a counterpart to the analytical communication style. The feelings and emotions can significantly influence this sort of personal communication style. This is someone who loves to talk, they love to share advice, they can be a bit of more of an open book, and offer an empathetic ear. And because of this, they're often really skilled problem solvers as well, because they're able to navigate that human piece and try to, think about the interpersonal ramifications of anything that arises. So this person may tend to use more emotional language. They tend to focus on the why of a problem. Why is this happening? Obviously very relationship oriented. The words really matter to this person. They can be more informal and friendly, empathetic communicators. So some upsides of this are, they're good listeners and they can be really diplomatic. A lot of times we think of these people as the glue of a workplace. They really can contribute to the culture piece and making sure everyone feels heard. They're very adept at building relationships and good at picking up on nonverbal cues. Some downsides to this person, they may become kind of exasperated if they feel like their energy is being exerted and not received at the same level that it's being given. And sometimes they can be viewed as a little too touchy-feely in the workplace because of the emotional nature of the language they use. And then finally, intuitive communicators. Did we have some of those in the room? So, okay, my people. This is me. Do you have any guesses about the intuitive communicator? This one's kind of tricky, I feel like. Yeah, this person tends to be, I think, best way to describe this is a big picture thinker. So this is someone who kind of likes to communicate quickly, more to the point. They tend to like the creative side of work a bit more, and in thinking outside of the box. They want to know the sort of long-term 10,000-foot overview of a problem at hand. So again, very big picture, concept focused. They're really good people to have in brainstorming sessions. They tend to have quite a bit of just common sense because they're able to zoom out of a problem. And they don't really like to waste their time. Again, they tend to be quick and to the point. Some upsides of working with this type are they're very adept at decision making because they're able to sort of, zoom out a bit. And they're comfortable with out of the box thinking, and enjoy challenging conversations. Some downsides are that they may be the kind of person who loses patience with the details. They just want to get to the gist of everything. And, that can have its own downsides when you're not reading the fine print. So those are our sort of 4 communication styles there. And now we're just going to kind of cover some tips on how to communicate with each of these styles best in the workplace. Again, not everyone fits 100% squarely into each box. And even when you're thinking about certain situations where, maybe the way you communicate with a peer is different than the way you communicate with a supervisor. So there may be different hats that you wear in different positions. But these are just kind of things to think about when you notice that someone you're working with gravitates towards communicating in a certain way. So we'll start here with the analytical communicator again.
Yeah, the analytical communicator, as we said before, is all about the facts and data. So when working with an analytical communicator, make sure that you offer clear outlines and expectations. Make sure that you're including all the data and all the numbers so that they can see it up front. And use direct communication. If it can be an email, if it can be a short phone conversation or a text, definitely do that over a meeting for 30 minutes where you might talk about the projects for 10 minutes. They'll see that as a waste of their time and not being respectful of their time. some things to avoid is overwhelming them with the small details or details that don't really matter in the moment. Pressuring them into social situations. So as I said, make sure if it can be an email, make it an email instead of maybe doing a group project for an hour where you only need to meet for 15 minutes. Because they rely so much on the hard data, they do not respond well to highly emotional language, such as I feel or my gut says. They'd rather use the data and say 15% of XYZ. That's some way that they can communicate. And instead, like asking them to run brainstorming sessions. So that's how best practices for an analytical communicator.
Yeah, they may get a little frustrated in the trying to figure out how to get to the point when they just want to use numbers, get to the point. We tend to see quite a lot of engineers can operate this way a bit.
Yeah. And the next is the functional communicator. So these are your task based people. They always have a to-do list. Provide as much information as possible. As we said, the same thing for the analytical communicator. Create written timelines and expectations. That way that they can keep track. Provide consistent feedback. These are the types of people who are always going to be asking for clarifying information and asking clarifying questions. That way they can try to fix or try to really see where the project goes. And then avoid rushing them. They do not do well if someone is rushing them, someone is taking them out of their process. Sometimes they can build flexibility within their process, but asking them to do things last minute, they're going to be frustrated, they're going to say no, and it's going to throw them off balance. And then finally, neglecting their process. It's one thing to say, I know that we had a timeline and we know had a deadline 48 hours before, and it's another thing 2 minutes before and saying, we're just going to go a different way. Making sure you ask them about their process and how to best work with them within their process. So it can be hard sometimes with analytical and functional, but knowing that you have the data, that you have the process down will help you with communicating with them and them communicating with you all.
Moving on to the personal communicator. Some sort of best practice tips with these folks are to warm them up a bit before diving into the work. Establishing that connection, even just, starting off a conversation. If you need something from someone who's a personal communicator and you just go up to them and immediately start talking about the issue, they might feel a little taken aback. So maybe, initially starting off with, hey, how's your day going? Okay, nice. Your niece's aunts, whatever. Okay, thanks for sharing. And then going in and diving into the work might be a bit more conducive to this style. And describing the thoughts and feelings and, behind the numbers. Again, these communicators really like to focus on the why behind a problem. So this can help them, adding more color into the issue can really help them make better sense of whatever the issue is at hand, and inquiring about their opinions and feelings can also really help. So using a warm tone with these folks, providing some extra context or backstory in the decision-making process can really help them feel more confident in the upcoming steps. Some things to avoid with these communicators might be, just shutting down their emotions or overloading them with more administrative tasks, and relying solely on email or instant messaging as a mode of communication can also be something to avoid if you're able to kind of pick up the phone or hop on a quick call. This might be the type of communicator who thinks if you end a sentence with a period, you might be mad at them. So any chance you kind of get to show your tone or have a lot of that nonverbal communication come through, that can really help this type of communicator. And then finally, our intuitive communicators. Some best practices here are to give them room to brainstorm, think creative thoughts. Using visuals, they tend to be visual thinkers, and having real life examples, tangible examples that can help them make sense and ground things, and providing quick and clear instructions. We'll want to avoid overwhelming them with too many details. That might kind of just like make them lose focus a bit. You might lose their attention. So keeping that communication kind of brief or just kind of focusing on the key highlighted parts will kind of help keep their attention on an issue. And you can also follow up with these folks with an email afterwards just to kind of summarize everything that you discussed. We'll also just want to avoid stifling their creative brains or micromanaging them, as that might get in the way of their sort of creative processes.
And now now that we've talked about the 4 different communication types, like how to best handle them, we're going to be talking about tips as you all start internships and emerging professionals on how to enhance your communication. So the first one is considering your audience. 93% of communication does not involve actually what you say. So that means that body language and tone really make up how your body communicates. So are you communicating with a peer? Are you communicating with an exec at your company? Are you communicating with your professor? And what's the environment? Can you be casual? Can you be professional? So realizing who you're speaking to and how to communicate best with them. In terms of, actively listen. A lot of times people are talking, but you might not be, and listening, but you might not be comprehending. So making sure that you're actively listening, asking clarifying questions are super important to make sure that you have all of the knowledge and you know how to do something. If you don't know how to do something, definitely ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask all the questions you need, because if you miss something, it's going to be a lot harder to fix it than if you did it upstream. Make sure that you're writing things down. Make sure that you go back to your notes and really understand everything. And then finally, use the right medium. And Alice is going to talk a little bit about the different mediums you're going to see as interns and emerging professionals.
Yeah, I'll cover some of that. I just have a quick question too, in terms of like some of these tips. Are these all things that you've kind of thought about before? And in terms of like active listening, is that a phrase you're familiar with? Yeah, okay, awesome. Yeah, and then just in terms of using the right medium, there's definitely a couple ways. I understand this will probably sound like, okay, duh, of course, just like how to use a phone. I know how to use a phone. I know how to send an email. You've been doing that for plenty time now. But we're gonna kind of have some just more tangible communication tips specific to the workplace that we kind of find are, the best practices that'll kind of set you up for success in the workplace. So kind of focusing specifically on these sort of, best practice for phone calls, for emailing, for using internal messages, and for one-on-one meetings. So with each of these items, there's a lot of ways in the workplace where once you kind of enter into starting a job where you focus on sort of the things in your job description and you're wanting to kind of onboard and get used to the company culture, things like that. But there might be a lot of unwritten rules that you'll have to navigate. And a lot of those things are kind of about these pieces here. So, at what point do I pick up a phone call to my supervisor? Or, if I'm, sending certain internal messages, can I just sort of ping my supervisor instead of sending them an email? These are all kind of things that you might not think about yet, but then once you're sitting there confronted with it, you're like, oh, I don't know the best way to go about this. So these are just some sort of quick overview do's and don'ts for some of these items. So on an item like phone calls, I know that picking up the phone is not something I love to do. I'd rather send an email or a quick message. But it's definitely something in the workplace that is super common. And I think it's something that if it's a little bit of a fear, that I'd encourage you to just practice as much as possible because it's kind of just a reality of the workplace. So even, something as little as setting up your voicemail is super helpful. If someone's calling you and they don't catch you, it's nice to know that your voice is on the other end of the line instead of just the callback number, just so they know that you are on the other line. And then another tip I have is writing out a short script. If you kind of get flustered on the phone or realize that once you pick it up, you don't know what to say, you could take a minute or two, just write out a quick Word document of what you want to cover, make sure you're not forgetting any questions you might have, and then having that to reference on the phone. And in terms of don't be afraid to pick it up and use it. There may be times where it feels more comfortable to write an email or send a text or a quick message when really it might just be the most efficient way to get a hold of someone in a more urgent circumstance. Emails, I think this is the one you're probably got down the most. So definitely, use these in the workplace when you're discussing really detailed information that you'll want to reference later. And then definitely encourage you to draft emails before sending them to someone. You'll always want to check for spelling errors, of course, verifying email addresses, but also just in case it's something that's being sent to, say, a client or outside of the organization. You'll just want to be triple checking everything. So definitely encourage drafting something before you start putting emails into the sending boxes. And then another thing that we'd encourage is to not really use this during urgent times. If you are, meeting someone immediately and, if it's easier to call or text them or send an internal message, that might get a quicker response than sending an email. It can depend on the organization or the circumstances, but if you're saving something to the last minute with an email, there may be other modes of communication that could be more useful at that time. Internal messages. This is probably what'll vary the most depending on the kind of organizations you're working at. Whether it's an internship or a full-time position, different organizations might use Teams or Slack or, whatever platform they're using. There can be nuances to how each organization uses it, but this is the place to, send the most sort of casual, informal questions, thoughts. And then a don't that we have is don't be sending messages that should be kept out of the workplace. I know that's obvious. There's still a lot of people who don't consider this. That maybe there's an HR department who would still, have access to these messages. So just be mindful when you're using these platforms, even if it's more casual. Keep in mind that it's still the workplace platform. And then finally, one-on-one meetings. I think this is something too where, depending on your supervisor, you might go into that meeting and expect them to kind of tell you what you should be expecting to do and things like that. But it's almost like office hours, you should go in kind of prepared with your questions think about sending an agenda ahead of time of the things you want to be covering in this meeting. And taking lots of notes to confirm any next steps as you discuss things in this meeting. There are a lot of times in the workplace where people can kind of just seek out the problems of something they're trying to solve, and then you walk away from the meeting and kind of go, wait, but I don't know what I was supposed to do after that, or did this person say they were going to handle that? I don't know when they're going to do that. So try to be specific during these meetings and take lots and lots of notes. And then also, of course, running late, give notice that you're running behind. Just the polite thing to do. And that is how to effectively communicate in the workplace.
Any questions or comments? We still have about 15 minutes.
Yeah, I have a question. So we went over all the different like communication personality types. Is there a way that is like a surefire way to understand that like this person, this is their communication type without them, going through that matrix? What's like the
Yes.
best way to find that out?
Yeah, the best way is honestly, now that you kind of are thinking of this as a framework for how people might communicate differently, I would just ask lots of questions about people's preferences in communicating from this point on. So it may seem kind of tedious, but asking questions about, is it easier for me to kind of just send everything in an email for you to understand instead of me talking at you, because some people might not retain information just in conversation. Feel free to explore different avenues, but this is hopefully going to kind of equip you with different ways to be thinking about how people might best make sense of, different preferences for communication, things like that. So I hate for that answer to be, now it's on you, but
And I
yeah.
go further, and in those meetings, it's about the questions. That analytical communicators, they like the data. So if you're in a group project with someone who is feeling frustrated that you don't have a lot of data, go to them and be like, hey, what are you looking for? Is there a resource that we're missing? Is there numbers that you feel should be on the project? Like, what's frustrating you? And you can kind of see whether it's like the data, if it's the fact that you didn't ask them how their day went and you just went directly to the project, if they feel like the timeline isn't being met, or the points within the timeline are being, you're going over it. You can kind of like guess what types of communication styles they are based on how they react to certain situations.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask kind of open-ended questions as well. Maybe someone might not understand if you say, are you an analytical communicator? And then they'll understand exactly what you mean by that. But now you can kind of think of, okay, is this person, really excited about the research behind a project? And then another person on this team is, reading through the research and kind of thinking about, okay, but how would it affect this community? And like, let's think about the people here. You can kind of navigate a group dynamic kind of based on some of this information.
That was a good question. Anyone else?
At one of my internships, my supervisor, who's the principal of the firm, he was great with communicating with me when I first started, saying like, how would you, like to go about, one-on-one meetings, or like, how do you work well? Like, what's your communication style, basically, and then I understood what his was, and the flow throughout the summer was much better. But I'm curious on how, when you're working in maybe a group setting in studio and you have a group project that's going on, and say you're working with a lot of people that are more of the analytical side of it, and you're more of the personal type person, I guess, or you're working with a group and they all have the same sort of mindset, thinking they're data oriented, etc. How do you then try to accommodate moving through a project that needs areas that these people might not necessarily be oriented towards or work well with? How do you approach then in more of like a group setting within the classroom?
I think that one, knowing their strengths and weaknesses, and if you can break up the project into different responsibilities, that's a good way to start by saying, hey, what responsibilities does everyone have? So if an analytical communicator isn't, doesn't do well with talking, maybe step up as that personal intuitive communicator and be like, hey, I'll talk for 80% of the time, go over the facts, because with functional and analytical communicators, they really want to know like the ins and outs before they speak about something. They don't want it to be ambiguous. They want to be considered like the experts. So they'll be combing through the resources and making sure that everything is perfect. Whereas a personal or intuitive communicator can kind of story tell. So if you know that you have to do a lot of storytelling, especially to a client or in a presentation, maybe step up but have that conversation beforehand and be like, I really want to, talk about this. I really want to explain in more detail. And it's going to sound like bad, but it's really it's a fail and learn, or learn and fail, and kind of like seeing like what works out. It's a lot of experimental, because every single person isn't going to present in the same way. You might have an analytical and functional person. You might have a functional and personal communicator. Everyone is a mix. So really just experimenting with what works well and what doesn't, and then presenting the data and be like, this is what we think works best.
Yeah, and I think on that too, there can also be a bit of kind of what we were saying initially, like there might be ways that people naturally gravitate towards, but there still might be a bit of, stretching and growing into other communication styles. I know there's probably all kinds of different ways where we kind of just have to concede a bit to the situation and say, okay, no one else is going to be doing this part of the project. So maybe either I just need to step up or, kind of ask someone else to handle this part of the project. Which again, that also comes from this sort of effective communication style of how can I kind of navigate this interpersonal, differences here, just to get the kind of end result of a completed project that's been well done. So again, like kind of opening up a bit of a dialogue of kind of a tool that we try to use a lot is this phrase called I'm noticing, I'm wondering. So kind of starting off something by saying, okay, I'm noticing a lot of us here are only wanting to do the research, but not so much actually build out the presentation and speak in front of the class. I'm wondering how we can get through that by, delegating the work kind of evenly amongst us all to work on the same amount of slides or, something like that. So kind of starting to share an observation you're having in that instance by saying, I'm noticing something, and then following up with, I'm wondering if this solution might work, can kind of make it less abrasive and, a bit more open to collaboration if you're trying to navigate something like that. But there may be times where everyone kind of has to step up in certain communication ways that might not be naturally what they want to do, but can also kind of help you grow your own communication skills in a way, I guess. Yeah. Any other questions? Awesome.
We did do effective communication workshop, but if you all have any questions regarding internships or as you obtain full-time positions, please let us know. Our email addresses, we'll send them to Andrew, but we're here for you all as a support as you step into the workforce, whether it's looking over your resume, portfolio, asking like what the market's looking like in certain regions. We are here to support you in your journey.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You're
thank you
welcome.
guys. Thanks. And good luck in studio and everything else later today. You'll make it
Yeah.
through. You're so close.
Hello. Thank you, though. We
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Of course, appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
You too.
Bye.